Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with objections to St. Thomas Aquinas' cosmological argument for the existence of God. This is going to be part 3 of our objections to this argument. So we've already looked at objections presented by Bertrand Russell and David Hume. Now we're going to be looking at an objection presented by Immanuel Kant and some of the things that fall out of that objection. So what Kant is going to say is that God is not logically necessary. For us to really understand this objection, we need to dig a bit deeper into the conclusion of the cosmological argument and what it really means to be necessary. So let's take a look. Necessity. Well, there's a couple different kinds of things we can mean by necessity. We could mean logical necessity, we could mean modal or metaphysical necessity, and we could mean factual necessity. Logical necessity means something whose contradiction is inconceivable. If something is logically necessary, the contradiction of that statement is inconceivable. We can't conceive of it. An example would be triangles have 3 sides. I couldn't conceive of a world where triangles have 4 sides or triangles are round. Modal necessity, on the other hand, means something that exists in all possible worlds. Basically, I might be able to conceive of the opposite of it, but in a world where that exists is not a possible world. Modally necessary things are things that exist in any possible world. Factual necessity, on the other hand, is defined as something that does not come into existence nor can cease to exist. It's basically something that is and always was, kind of thing. Let's take a look at each of these necessities and see which one fits best the cosmological argument. So, logical necessity. Here's where Kant really strongly objects. So I cannot conceive of a 4-sided triangle. I cannot conceive of both P and not P. I don't even understand what either of those things would look like. But it seems that I can conceive of a world without God. So I'm a little worried that God would be logically necessary. And even if you still think that God is logically necessary, this seems to assume the truth of the ontological argument for the existence of God. Basically, that God is a maximally great being and therefore logically necessary. You'll only buy the idea that God is logically necessary if you already buy the ontological argument. If you don't buy the ontological argument, there's no way you're going to buy the cosmological argument. It's the same problem that's going to show up with modal necessity as well, because it seems that both logical necessity and modal necessity rely very heavily on the ideas presented in the ontological argument for the existence of God. If you're confused by that, we're going to do a video later. Check that out. It seems that both of those rely very heavily on the ontological argument, and so if the ontological argument were to succeed, then the cosmological one would as well. But were the ontological argument to fail, the cosmological argument couldn't stand up on its own 2 feet. Modal necessity, like I said, falls into the same trap. If God exists, he exists in all possible worlds. So we need an argument for God's possibility, not for his necessity. We need the ontological argument to stand up and to help the cosmological argument get started. Also, it seems that if God is modally necessary but not logically necessary, he might not have existed in any world. Sure, modal necessity says that he exists in all possible worlds, but it's possible that he didn't exist in any world. So, this makes him logically contingent, and therefore he cannot satisfy the cosmological argument. Remember, the cosmological argument needed something that was necessary such that we would understand why there is something instead of nothing, why there is this instead of that. If something is logically contingent, it can't satisfy the cosmological argument, even if it's modally necessary. Factual necessity is basically saying that God exists for all time. But once again, as with modal necessity, if God is factually necessary but not logically necessary, he might not have existed in any world. Even if he existed for all time and didn't stop existing, it's possible that he didn't exist at all. So, he is logically contingent, and therefore, once again, he can't satisfy the cosmological argument. In fact, the cosmological argument seems to be an objection to God's existence, or a stipulation of something more powerful than God, if God is only factually necessary and not logically necessary. However, the most convincing piece against the cosmological argument is the idea of necessary being, because without the ontological argument, we can't define necessary being as something that is only and God. Necessary being can be defined as the Big Bang, the universe itself, or consciousness. Anything that we don't understand enough to say that it's certainly contingent, we could call the necessary being that was needed to kickstart the universe in some way. Without the ontological argument, we cannot equate this necessary being to God. I'll leave you with a quote from Bertrand Russell. Mathematics takes us into the region of absolute necessity, to which not only the actual word, but every possible word must conform. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.